Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's discussion on Afghanistan, its evolving political landscape, regional implications, and the pathways forward one hopes to stability and engagement. And we're honoured to have four distinguished guests, each bringing deep expertise and unique perspectives on Afghanistan's governance, security, and regional dynamics. Let me introduce them to you, after which each of them will talk for about 5 minutes or so, and you, the audience, will be able to ask questions at the end, but please do post any questions that you have in the meantime. Dr. Niloufar Saki is a scholar of security and peace, specialising in regional, transnational, and human security, peacemaking, and conflict resolution. She's an associate research professor of international affairs at the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. She also directs the Andiana Foundation, a public policy and research organisation focused on peace and security. Additionally, she's a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. We're also welcoming Mohsin Dawar, a former Pakistani parliamentarian, a human rights advocate, and one of the most prominent political voices from the former Fatah region. He's been a consistent critic of militancy, a vocal defender of civilian rights, and an important commentator on Pakistan's evolving Afghanistan policy, especially its impact on border communities and regional stability. Hans Schindler is a co-director of the Counter-Extremism Project think tank and an expert on counterterrorism and international security. He's advised global bodies on sanctions, extremist networks, and the regional security environment surrounding Afghanistan. Kabir Taneja is a researcher and analyst with the Observer Research Foundation, focused on foreign policy, security, and extremist movements, particularly in West and South Asia. His work examines technological, ideological, and geopolitical trends shaping Afghanistan's future. And Ambassador Asif Durrani is Pakistan's former ambassador to Iran and the UAE, and a seasoned diplomat with long experience in South Asian and Afghan affairs. His perspective on regional geopolitics and diplomatic engagement is invaluable. So together, our panel will explore Afghanistan's current challenges and opportunities, from humanitarian and human rights concerns to regional security shifts and diplomatic strategies. I'm delighted to welcome all of you, and I look forward to a thoughtful and constructive conversation. Thank you all once again for being here. But before we begin, let me offer a brief overview of where Afghanistan stands today and the questions that are shaping our discussion. Afghanistan is now more than 4 years into a political and security landscape defined by the Taliban's return to power in August 2021. The humanitarian crisis is one of the world's most severe, with many millions of people facing food insecurity and minimal access to basic services. At the same time, questions about governance, human and other fundamental rights, economic sustainability, and international recognition continue to evolve in complex and often contradictory ways. Regionally, Afghanistan sits at the centre of shifting geopolitical currents. Neighbouring countries weigh their own security concerns, economic interests, and diplomatic approaches, while extremist networks, cross-border tensions, and competitive alignments continue to challenge any coherent regional strategy. International actors, meanwhile, are still searching for, and as we know, some are finding, avenues of engagement that purport to balance humanitarian imperatives with political and economic realities. So against this backdrop, our panel today brings invaluable insight into what these dynamics mean on the ground, how regional policies are shaping outcomes, and what realistic pathways exist for improving stability, rights, and governance, both within and around Afghanistan's realities. So, with that context in mind, I'd like to begin with Dr. Niloufar Saki. Niloufar, welcome again. You've written extensively on human security, rights, and the realities that Afghan people are living through, particularly women and girls and civil society. From your vantage point, how would you characterize the situation today? And what do you see as the most urgent priorities for improving human security in Afghanistan?
Well, thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Bahrain Initiative for Development, for having me here today. Since the topic is actually about the Taliban and regional instability, and I have written extensively on this issue from last few years, particularly following Taliban's network with the regional militant groups, and also what it means for internal security of Afghanistan, and also for the regional stability, which has been the mantra of the region and international community from last 4 years. So I would like to highlight on three main points at this beginning remarks of mine. It would be general, of course, but then I see that as a setting ground for my follow-up kind of analysis of the situation. First of all, I think the core of the challenge for the region and for Afghanistan is the Taliban itself. I see Taliban as an existential threat to the future of Afghanistan and to the regional stability. And why I'm saying that, because of the identity of the Taliban and characteristics of the Taliban. Taliban, as they originally emerged as a militant group in 1990s, with a long-standing links to the transnational militant group, particularly Al-Qaeda, that we have seen over the years. They have strong networks with the militant groups of Central Asia, based in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. They have very strong and interconnected relationship with Tehrik-e-Taliban in Pakistan, TTP, that we have seen from last a few years since the Taliban take over, the surge in TTP attacks in Pakistan, which is clearly show that from where they got this inspiration. And also going beyond, they have connection with the fundamentalist groups in Bangladesh, that initially when they took power, there were some statements coming from that. And so, and going and talk about different other groups, there are ideological connection. There is a financial sort of transaction between them and other militant groups. And of course, the expansionist approach that I always see associated with the militant groups' agenda. So the first for me, particularly following last 4 years and the fact that they haven't been able to cut ties with these transnational militant groups in the region, is the identity of the Taliban, the characteristics that make them a threat. Their presence is a threat for me that I would see. And they are, by the way, they are not coming from reports of the media only. There has been research on that, particularly the UN report recently in the past provide lots of this evidence. So there is, since the Taliban takeover, there has been a concern about this connectivity of them with other militant groups. And we have seen the instability in Afghanistan, also the region. So just to provide more context to that, soon after the Taliban takeover in 2022, we have seen cross-border clashes between Uzbekistan and Afghanistan and Iran based on water. So the main issue was the water crisis that particular time. We have also seen the trade and transit issue, and then which caused actually armed clashes between Tajikistan and Afghanistan in 2022 and early 2023. Going forward, we also witnessed the presence of Jamaat Ansarullah in Badakhshan province, which were recruited by the Taliban in different posts and places of the northern part of Afghanistan. So So what all this say to us, demonstrate the fact that these groups are present in Afghanistan, provided sanctuary, provided weaponry support, enabling situation for recruitment. That by itself says that Taliban have these groups in shelter at this point. The second main trait that I would see, and that we have seen that emerged so much and reorganized under the Taliban since last 4 years, is the resurgence of ISKP. Well, ISKP, some believe, according to data, that they are enemies of the Talib. That's all another story and another area that we need to explore, and we have to find more data on that. But in a nutshell, I think the Taliban's return motivated groups like ISKP also to emerge, to reorganize themselves, to get more inspiration, and also conduct attacks in different parts of the region that we have seen in Iran and Moscow, Shiraz of Iran and Moscow over time, and also in several places in Afghanistan, actually, their attacks were there. So this is a second evidence that provide us a clear idea that how the security threats emerged under the Taliban recent takeover, and how that escalated throughout the region. And the most important thing, I think, based on all this fact, the recent one, which is TTP, and the fact that there is a very strong connection between Tehrik-e-Taliban in Afghanistan and Tehrik-e-Taliban in Pakistan, and this relationship is not only ideological, but I would say it's a transaction of businesses and money. There is a family ties and bonds between Tehrik-e-Taliban in Pakistan and Tehrik-e-Taliban in Afghanistan. And they have provided support and shelter to each other during times of crisis when they were in. So this tie is not really easily to be broken. I mean, despite Taliban are saying that we don't provide TTP any sanctuary or any support, but I don't see that as a real reality. There is no any evidence to prove that, and most importantly, that with the Taliban takeover, we have seen how TTP has reorganized, reemerged, and strengthened its network throughout both Afghanistan, and the attacks in Pakistan also demonstrate the fact that they got more support now. So what all this means for Afghanistan and going beyond in the region? First of all, if the same Taliban continue ruling, there will be two threats to Afghanistan. First is the presence of this militant group, which I gave example to. Second, radicalization under the Taliban takeover, rule from last 4 years. There has been number of madrasas in different parts of the country that has been established and supported by different entities, particularly even now by Saudis. There has been a contract, I think 2 years back, signed between the Taliban authorities and the Saudi government on establishment of more madrasas. So the madrasas over here, of course, there are other kind of responsibilities of madrasas and functions of madrasas, but the jihadi madrasas, they have one agenda, and that is to promote extremism. And extremist element, when they emerge in society, that give also a space to militant groups and extremist group and jihadi group to find their place in Afghanistan. So the fear that we have, who really follow the security inside Afghanistan, that this radicalization itself will promote more hard security threat going forward. And that will actually welcome a space and open a space for other jihadi group or militant group to find their base in Afghanistan, and the recruitment becomes easier for them. So that's a fear that many of us who follow the security in Afghanistan have this, and it would be a long-term impact, would be disastrous for the country itself. The second is the regional aspect. Well, the Taliban are, in addition to being militant group, they are learning how to deal with the regional countries. They are actually selling this as their powers. The fact that they are connected with militant group, the fact that for them it's a power, it's a show of power. That if, for example, if any country in the region, if you don't listen to us, we know how to make you listen to us, right? And that is to promote this kind of threats. and they show that, and they will show that. So that's the fear I have right now. Moscow recognition, which I've written extensively on that, and then of course India coziness with the Taliban, and it seems they're not learning from what Taliban did to Pakistan, who were supporting them for many, many years. I mean, the case study of Pakistan establishment and Taliban in Afghanistan should be a lesson learned for the regional countries that you cannot trust a militant group. And if you should go way around, but you cannot trust a militant group. So I would like to stop here at this point, Lynn. And of course, in addition to what say further elaboration, I'm happy to provide. Thank you.
Oh, well, thanks, Niloufar. I think we'll circle back to you with some questions later. But you talk so eloquently about the Taliban's Afghanistan as a safe haven for militancy growing and them drawing power from that. And I think our next guest, Mohsin Dawar, knows better than anyone in the world the power of what he has called in the past Project Taliban. I've already introduced you, Mohsin, as a prominent rights activist and political voice from the former Fatah, and as an important commentator on Pakistan's evolving policy on Afghanistan, which we may call the post-strategic depth era. Mohsin, given your long-standing engagement with issues facing the Pashtun belt, how do you see the current Afghanistan-Pakistan dynamic shaping conditions on the ground for the people of your region in North Waziristan and beyond? And what do you believe as Islamabad is still getting wrong in its approach?
Well, thank you, Lynn. First of all, thanks to Bahrain Institute and you for inviting me to this prestigious webinar. And I think Niloufar made it very easy for me to take the case forward, and she almost said most of which what I wanted to say. In the recent context, we cannot discuss the situation disconnecting it with the global powers who are, planning in their own ways for this region. The way abruptly the U.S. Withdraw from Afghanistan, and the way they handed over Afghanistan very much easily through the Doha Agreement, it definitely, and people like me, political workers like me, and many others they have been talking at that time that this is the start of a new great game, and America is leaving this region purposely, and they are leaving behind all the weapons which worth millions of dollars. They are leaving it behind purposely. And even at that time, all the regional countries, including Pakistan, China, and Russia, everybody wanted to. Uh, uh, Everybody wanted the U.S. to leave. But then, even at that time, we have been raising this issue that if they leave, they will leave behind a mess which will not be able to contain that much easily by the regional powers. And that's what happened then. Right now, as Niloufar said that, all the regional countries, even the big powers like Russia and China, they're trying to oblige the Taliban just for the only reason to avoid any kind of conflict with them, and to avoid any kind of penetration within their own countries, which we have seen after the fall of Kabul. In Moscow, we have seen the disturbance in the Wakhan corridor. We have seen it in the other Central Asian states. And if we talk about Pakistan, as Pakistan has been a very long strategic ally of the US since the Cold War, and even now, they were the one who facilitated the Doha process. They took Mullah Biradar from Karachi to Doha, and they were, almost a kind of after the Qatar, they were the host of all. They have been hosting all this process, and they were, those who have kept Afghan Taliban alive for more than 20 years. They wouldn't have survived had there been no support from Pakistan for all during all this time. So they had a hegemony, and they had an impact, and they had a very much control on them for a very long time. Now, what happened was that even at that time, political workers like me, we have been yelling around. We have been saying so much loudly. My speeches are the part of the record in the parliament, which I have been saying from 2018, and even after the fall of Kabul. One of my article in the news is still a part of the record in which I, at the end of the day, at the end of my article, I have mentioned that in search of a strategic depth in Afghanistan, Pakistan has actually handed over a strategic depth to Taliban in Pakistan. And that's what is happening right now, because now they have power, they have they have a country to rule, and they are in a bargaining position to deal with the regional countries, and they are again, they were never two different groups. The local groups, be it Hafiz Gul Bahadur or be the Tehrik Taliban Pakistan, they have grown up and they have flourished, and they have, expanded under the umbrella of Afghan Taliban, and their survival wasn't possible without the financial and logistic support of Afghan Taliban. In keeping in view all this thing, we have been saying to the policymakers in Pakistan that, look, you are trying to destroy in Afghanistan, but indirectly it will be, it will come back. And then this is something which is happening right now in most of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. They have a de facto control. They have de facto control in Deir Ismail Khan, in Banu, north and south Waziristan, in Tank, in Lucky Marwat. And they have a very significant presence in almost every part of the province. And 3 weeks ago, there was a blast in Islamabad also. No, so it raises a question on the policymakers in Pakistan also. There, either you want this chaos, because it's very much clear that the US they want a chaos in the region to specifically disturb the Chinese expansion, to contain it, and along with that, to create an environment which will haunt all the regional countries. So, being a part of all what the US have been doing in past 45 years, so a question arises that either you are complicit in whatever happened during all this time, because if a political worker like me can understand that what the repercussions of supporting Taliban going to be, you know, and we have been telling them in the parliament and all other meetings, the national security meetings, that don't do it, but they were still doing it. So they might have whatever their agenda was, but till that time there was they were complicit. They were a part of all what was happening. So even right now, it again arises the question that whether you are seriously you seriously want to stop the militancy or not, because even now the families and the businesses and the properties of most of the leadership of Afghan Taliban, they're still in Pakistan. And they also believe, the leadership of Afghan Taliban, they still believe that this is the only place which they can go for a protection permanently, because they also believe that Afghanistan isn't their permanent place. So, concluding all these things, it then arises questions on the policy making of Pakistan also, that either you want to you are extending the continuation of the policies of the strategic interest, what the West wants, what the America wants, or you were so much uncapable that you didn't predicted that it's gonna happen this way. Right now, as long as there is a presence of Taliban in Afghanistan, I think the modus operandi of all the regional countries, including Russia and China, I think sooner or later they will regret, because death and destruction is the only thing which they know. And starting, what happened after the fall of Kabul was that there were thousands of fighters who were fighting for that victory. But after that victory, I believe, I don't have the statistics, but how much people would have been adjusted in that state structure? How much of them would have got the reward of fighting for more than 20 years? So that foot soldier who who felt that I'm left out, they were diverted toward Pakistan and other region. That look, jihad is not over. Uh, Go ahead. And right now, what we are witnessing is that in Waziristan and Banu and all these areas, if they are 5 foot soldiers of the TTP, they would be accompanied by, I would say, 10 from Afghan Taliban, and it will increase. The number will further increase. The kind of situation which is created now, the border is closed. So the closure of border, it means more joblessness on both sides of the
Mm,
border, and which
mm,
create even a more friendly environment for recruitment for the militants. And along with that, the volume of refugees which have been sent back to Afghanistan, uh, this is that the figure is very high, and
mm,
they were the people who were, most of them were labor class. They were, either working in the as a laborers, as a carpenter. They are working class, and they do not have even the labor work to do in Afghanistan. And in such
mm,
kind of situation, and as Nilofer mentioned before me, that there is a huge number of new madrasas which has been constructed, and that is purposely for the only reason that the raw material which is needed right now for that has been the environment has been created for that. So this is the only option. This is the only option for the livelihood for the people to join these madrasas and join the Taliban. And then again, when these people go back, the refugees, they go back to Afghanistan, and when they look around, they don't have any opportunity. And when they come across the only opportunity, which is militancy, so that they won't have any other option. And it will
mm,
further multiply the volume of the foot soldiers who are involved in these militant and terrorist activities across the region. So as long as there are Taliban in Afghanistan, there is no chance of a peace, not just in Afghanistan, but in the entire region.
mm. Indeed. Thank you for your comments. It's an ongoing refrain, isn't it, Mohsin? When I visited you in Miran Shah, I think maybe 18 months ago, certainly just days
Yep.
before the last election,
Yep.
I found a region at war. There was no denying it, even though it wasn't covered. Nobody talked about it. People like me were not allowed to go there. I got into trouble later. But
And the
there
way you
is
came, yeah, that was also very interesting. They would have allowed you if you went through the
no,
formal process.
no,
Yeah.
indeed. But I got through and I saw the reality on the ground in your home. And I can only imagine that it is getting worse. And as you say, we're talking about exponential growth of the problem because the Pakistani authorities are incapable or unwilling, which is it, to deal with the problem. Do they now have a choice?
Oh, well, I think they still have not decided it. I guess the script is the same. It is the continuation of what started after the Doha deal. Things are going accordingly. And also, the the talks, they made a reason to bring them back. And it was that we want to engage in talks with them, and we will bring them back and they will live peacefully, which was not possible. And at the parliament there was, I think at that time only I opposed this idea of dialogue with Taliban, because I said that they're right now they believe that we are talking from position of strength, and from position of strength we will dictate that on which terms and conditions we are going to talk to you. And they said that whatever they have been saying formally and informally, that we want control over all this region. So we have been asking all the policymakers at that time that are you ready to surrender the writ of the state in some region to these people? And if not, they are not going to accept anything less than that. But as I said, that actually the plan was to bring them back, and accordingly, that was something which happened. And when they came back, and then the volume of their attacks, it almost multiplied 3-4 times. Then later on they realized, look, and in the next national security meeting, when the military command was changed, and the opinion was that it shouldn't have been done, and that was the mistake. But right now, again, I believe that as long as there is a protection for the Afghan Taliban leadership in Pakistan, the general masses, they will doubt any actions regarding any policy regarding the militancy or anti militant activity. So because they believe that as long as you have not controlled them, the doubt will remain in their minds.
Indeed. So the ripple effects are broad and deep. Thank you so much for your contribution, Mohsin. I really appreciate it. And now to broaden the lens to the regional and global security implications, I'd like to turn to Hans Schindler. Over the past several years, we've seen a worrying consolidation of momentum among a range of Islamist extremist groups, not only in Afghanistan, but also across Africa and the Middle East. Groups like Al-Qaeda's many affiliates in the Sahel and Somalia, and multiple Islamic State groups, all drawing on what many of them openly describe as the victory narrative that traces back to the fall of the Afghan Republic. Within Afghanistan itself, and as we've heard from Mohsin most explicitly in his region of Pakistan, the close ties between Haqqani network and Al-Qaeda, the persistent operational freedom within Afghanistan of ISKP, and the ongoing tension with Afghanistan over the TTP all point to an increasingly complex and volatile threat landscape globally, not just regionally. On top of that, we've got the ETIM and TIP presence, both in Afghanistan and in parts of Syria, which adds another layer of long-term regional concern. Hans, thank you so much for joining us here today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your analysis of that broader global security threat that we're facing.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, of course, to the Baran Initiative for inviting me. As Lynn has already alluded to, I want to look a little bit at the broader global situation on the basis of what was actually the long-term strategy of these terror groups. Dr. Niloufar has called the militant groups. I think there's no need to make them sound less threatening that they are terror groups, and they have not changed their ideology because the strategy is actually working. What was the innovation that modern Islamist terrorism in the form of Al-Qaeda and than in the second form of IS actually postulated. The postulation was, if there is a sufficient time, a sufficient amount of attacks on Western interest or Western targets, both in the foreign countries as well as in the West itself, the West will lose economic, political, and military interest in the regions where we are present. And once they withdraw, we will be able to take over power. Now, in Kabul, that worked like a charm. We weren't even out of Kabul yet when the Taliban were back. And it was not just the Taliban being back, it is the same individuals that the international community and the Afghan forces threw out of their positions in Kabul in 2002. So there could not have been a more 180-degree turnaround in the situation in Afghanistan possible, even imaginable. This, however, was only the starting point. We are now looking at a ISIL and Al-Qaeda network that is significantly stronger than it's ever been. Everyone focused on the defeat of the physical caliphate in 2019, and that was a success of counterterrorism operations. However, very currently, we're facing the possible imminent takeover of the capital of Bamako, of Mali, by the Al-Qaeda affiliate Jinim, which also already controls 65% of neighboring Burkina Faso. The Islamic State Sahel province, as well as the Islamic State West Africa province, are increasingly operating in Niger, in Mali, as well as in Nigeria, and breaking out of their contained areas. We also have a situation in East Africa that Al-Shabaab is several kilometers from the capital of Mogadishu. So if things go very badly, we will have Al-Qaeda not running one country, but two countries directly in the very near future, i.e. within a couple of months. That all for the background that in Afghanistan, we still have the situation that Al-Qaeda has 100% and all of its affiliates, 100% protection by the Taliban. The TTP is only the most obvious example of this. While ISKP has now been responsible for several successful terror attacks, most spectacularly the attack on the Moscow theater in spring 2024, but also the Solingen knife attack. It inspired the New Orleans attack in December 2024, and it was responsible for initiating, instructing, and coordinating numerous attacks, most famously also the luckily prevented attack against the Taylor Swift concert in Vienna. None of this, however, changes the what I would only call very active disinterest of the European as well as the US administrations on the situation in South Asia. The shock of what happened in Afghanistan, the abject failure of anything that was tried in the last 20 years, going away within hours of us deciding to leave the country, sits very, very deep. And despite this enormous amount of terrorism growth, not just in your region, but also in Africa and in the Middle East, and the fact that we in Syria now have a former Al-Qaeda leader being the interim president, and Al-Qaeda elements being part of its administration, none of this conjures up enough political will to not deal just with the largest land war in Europe since the end of the Second World War in Ukraine, not just to focus on the situation in the Middle East and Gaza, but also to recognize that Islamist international terrorism is back, and that we have in Afghanistan the very same people doing the very same things that they did in the late 1990s, with the very same groups that they did that in the late 1990s, where we also told ourselves collectively that this is a foreign problem and not our problem, with very well-known results. I'm speaking from New York. This city knows what the results were. So unfortunately, I don't have good news. I do not see that this situation is going to change very quickly, despite the fact that you had this massive spike in attacks in Pakistan. Year on year, my organization monitors everything that ISIL Al-Qaeda does in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Year on year is about 100%. Every year, 100% more attacks in Pakistan than there were the year before. It is still seen as a very regional problem. The only engagement that the European governments at the moment are actually actively pursuing is to find some kind of unofficial deals with the Taliban regime in Kabul to extradite migrants that have become perpetrators of criminality in Europe in order to stem the rise of right-wing populist parties all over Europe. That's where we are. I unfortunately cannot see that this is going to turn around. So there was a lot about the designs that America has for the region in the first two presentations was mentioned. I wish it would have designs. Unfortunately, the resources are gone. The strategic thinking is gone. Not only from this administration, I would postulate that any other alternative US administration would take a very equally disinterested look, unfortunately, at this region. It will come at our peril, I'm sure. I've been through this in the 1990s. I've been arguing against finding moderate Taliban already in the 1990s with the European governments when I was still a government official, but we have the very same discussions now. So I really don't know how this situation can be ameliorated, but we are concentrating, as far as I can see, as far as the US and Europe is concerned, when it comes to terrorism defense, on domestic terrorist defense. And we are very, very, very hesitant to do any multilateral, overseas, larger scale counterterrorism operations anytime soon, this year or in the coming years. Sorry that I don't have any better news, but it's no point in sugarcoating things.
Well, no, indeed. I think anyone who came here today for good news was severely delusional. I'm very grateful to you for your roundup. Hans, do you think that well, I'd like to know, especially given what we've heard from Niloufar and from Mohsin, that we're looking at the exponential growth, not only of attacks, but also of the number of people who will be looking for the $20 to pick up an AK-47 and shoot it in that direction because there isn't any alternative. So why do you think that being told, even though we're being told constantly by people like us here on this group panel today, what the reality is, that the international community is largely overlooking, or at the very least underestimating, the scale of the threat? What do you put that down to?
I mean, first of all, I fully agree with the assessment that extraditing an extraordinary amount of Afghan refugees back into Afghanistan is just about the worst idea you could have if you want to stem the tide of extremism and terrorism. I have not seen the Taliban regime being even interested or willing to set up the necessary programs to give economic opportunities, which of course then leaves a lot of opportunities for terrorist organizations for recruiting this. And they are very obviously using this. The disinterest, I'm afraid, of the international community, in particular the European and the North American governments on the situation in the region, is unfortunately the result of the strategy working. Unfortunately, it seems that Osama bin Laden had a point where he said, if we tire the West out long enough, it will withdraw and it will not come back. I'm afraid we're seeing this. The situation may change if there is a large-scale additional migration problem or a large-scale terror attack anywhere in North America and Europe. But look, we had the largest number for German standards, largest number of terror attacks since the Second World War between May 2024 and May 2025. 9 successful terror attacks and dozens of disrupted terror attacks in the country. But that just didn't change the appetite for overseas counterterrorism operations. There are now various domestic procedures and legal arrangements that are changed as a result of this. But no one is even beginning to discuss that counterterrorism support for the states bordering these countries where these groups are operating or in part taking over. That's just not on the cards right now. I put this down to what I call the Afghanistan trauma. 20 years with absolutely no result whatsoever.
Well, what do you see as being the long-term implications of the Taliban's protection of several Al-Qaeda aligned groups operating in Afghanistan, and also the possibly a couple of dozen of, and I would imagine the number is growing, of training camps operated by Al-Qaeda it's a back to the future situation where these people coming in from Pakistan as refugees, as well as the militants from the Sahel and elsewhere, are channeling through. Where do we go from this realistically, nihilistically?
So since Al Qaeda has not changed its ideology, since the impression, and we, as I said, we monitor their discussions online quite intensively, since in their mind the strategy is actually working, it is only a matter of time until we not only seeing ISKP inspiring and guiding terror attacks in the West, but also Al Qaeda again. One has to ask the question: what are these Al Qaeda groups in these camps actually training for? With the exception of the TTP, none of them are operating regionally, yet they continue to train in these camps in Afghanistan. And obviously, the only conclusion one has to come to is that they are training to fulfill what their ideological postulate is. That means more attacks on the West. At the moment, it still seems that the Taliban leadership has asked them not to embarrass themselves by conducting a terror attack in the West that clearly emanates back to Afghanistan. But that's just a matter of time. I think this is the last card that the Taliban hold in their negotiations with the European governments to say we're holding back Al Qaeda from attacking you in your homeland. And therefore, you will have to recognize ourselves. So sooner or later, the really difficult question for the European governments is going to be, are we walking towards a de facto recognition of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan for the price of actually being able to extradite criminal migrants back into the country? Or are we holding the line? I see the line slipping. I'm sure it's not really widely known, but the German government just handed over the Consulate General of Afghanistan in Bonn to the Taliban. So I can see this not as an official, we are recognizing this as the legitimate government. After all, it's not really been elected, nor does the Taliban regime, as you would expect from Islamist terror organization, extremist organization, interested in any time having any kind of elections. And it still has the same attitude, of course, feeling itself part of a wider global Islamist movement, not directly, but certainly through its proxies. For Pakistan, that means TTP. For China, that means the TIP. And for the West, that means pretty much everyone else that they are actively protecting.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much, Hans, for your comments. As chilling as the reality is, it's nice to have it laid out now and then in your very cogent and erudite way. Thank you. Ambassador Durrani, I will turn to now, is a seasoned Pakistani diplomat who's served in India, the UN mission in New York, London, and Kabul. More recently, from May 2023 to September 2024, he was Pakistan's special representative on Afghanistan, and he's currently a senior research fellow at the Islamabad Policy Research Institute. Ambassador, given your direct involvement in shaping and critiquing Pakistan's recent Afghanistan policy, how do you assess the current trajectory of Pakistan-Afghanistan relations, particularly in light of the refugee expulsions that we've been talking about and the escalating security concerns on both sides of the border?
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you. I'm grateful to Bahrain for inviting me. Well, dealing with Taliban has been a frustrating experience. So whatever frustration has been expressed here by Dr. Hans Schindler and before that, Dr. Sakhi, Dr. Nilofer Sakhi, and also Mohsen Daur also talked about that. But the issue is they are a reality. They are a business in the town, what to do. As a realist or as a state, what we are going to do. And when I talk from the Pakistan's perspective, what should we do when we have 17 tribes on the border, divided on both sides of the border? Shinware, Moman, Achakzai, Nurzai. These are the tribes they are. In fact, before this one document regime, which was introduced and restrictions were put on free flow of people. Pakistan used to have 50 to 60,000 Afghans straddling the border every day for work or for businesses. Now, this is the situation on the ground. Among them are the people who either they are part of TTP or part of One Taliban. Like recent surge in TTP attacks was actually facilitated by the Afghan Taliban, or for that matter, Afghan Taliban themselves were part of those attacks. So these are the frustrations for any government in Pakistan. And then that too at a time when there were some people who celebrated Taliban's coming to Kabul. Now I think they are cutting a sorry figure, and then that situation is now going back to the drawing board, and now the governments want to change the track. So now how, whether they succeeded or not, the jury is still out. But the main issue is that there has been a surge in terrorist attacks, and how to control them. Each government has its own priorities. So right now, I think that trade has been used as a tool, and trade is stopped since 12th October between the two countries. And it is causing millions of dollars of losses, especially to the Afghan traders. But this is just not the Afghan traders, actually. It is also causing immense losses to the people, normal people. Already Afghanistan is suffering from abject poverty. Where poverty graph is almost 97%, out of which around 52%, as per the UN estimates, are actually dependent on international assistance. If that graph of international assistance, and mind you, international assistance has been dwindling by the year since 2021 onwards. So the situation is grave. And it is equally dangerous, not just for Pakistan, for the entire immediate neighborhood and beyond. And in that situation, if the Taliban, they don't want to talk to, and when I said that it was a frustrating experience talking to the Taliban, it was that, for instance, I give you one example, that in May 2023, they signed the trilateral joint statement between Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Chinese foreign ministers, in which the Taliban foreign minister, Muttaqi, committed that the Afghan Taliban government will control the TTP and ETIM. And when this trilateral foreign minister meeting was held in July this year, the Afghan Taliban government, those delegation refused even to repeat that language of May 2023 understanding. And when the reason was asked, they said, well, last time when we agreed, it caused a lot of problems for us from our leadership. So we are not. So here what I'm trying to underline is that they lack art of governance, they lack diplomacies, under which if they have agreed to an understanding, it is quite easy for them to vanish from that. And this is what we have witnessed. For instance, when we were holding dialogues, there were no takeaways after the dialogue. So that was frustrating experience. Reason is that if you look at in the Taliban's foreign office today, hardly 27 or 28 professional diplomats are left. The rest are all mullahs. So they know how to negotiate. It's not enough as far as diplomacy is concerned. So, and it causes frustration. I'm sure my colleagues from Europe who may have been talking to the Taliban, whether in Doha or directly in Kabul or their own capitals, they can, they can vouch that whatever discussion they have with the Taliban, what kind of a takeaway they have with those meetings, with those understandings, unless you are giving to the Taliban regime something. and then they'll be happy. For instance, now India has been traditionally paying the Afghan regimes, whether it was Zahir Shah's time or Sardar Daoud's time, or for that matter, communist time, or then came the Mujahideen after the civil war, or for that matter, when Taliban 1.0, so there was a nexus between India, Russia, and Iran. So though India was paying them. For instance, during the past 20 years, India had a field day. They were paying the who is who of Afghanistan. I was deputy head of mission in Kabul from 2005 till 9. So we have had many evidences that they were paying. So while India's soft image is very much there among the Afghans, but especially those who are officials, because it's an easy way to gain their favor and not get anything in return. So that's the soft power image at the moment, because India does not enjoy the geographical advantage as far as Afghanistan is concerned. But having said that, what happened? Once Taliban came in August 2021, India had to wander because they had nothing there. And then India was the one which was presenting Taliban as terrorists, right? But as you say, politics makes strange bedfellows. So now they are enjoying, they are sharing the same bed. So it is politics, reality. So here, even if we become emotional about terrorism and all that, but the real politics is there on the ground, that you are actually seeing what is at hand and what is on your plate at the moment, how you can clear it at the moment. So this is what no one is talking about posterity. Gone are those leaders, or gone are those political parties who would plan. Now, what are you seeing at the United States? It is actually a day-to-day politics which you witness. And what is happening in the European scene? In fact, Europe has just perhaps given up as far as international issues are concerned. Forget about Afghanistan. Afghanistan is nowhere. There's no appetite as far as Europe is concerned or United States is concerned. There's no appetite whatsoever. And we can still claim that ISKP is gaining ground, Al-Qaeda is gaining ground. There are over 20 terrorist groups which are holed up in Afghanistan. But right now, there's no appetite. So only in the immediate neighbors, they are vulnerable, and of which Pakistan is bearing the brunt. But how you control that situation, it will take a while. As far as TTP is concerned, Mohsen Daur talked about that they have a control in KP, but I would say from political point of view, TTP does not enjoy popular support among the people. I think PTM enjoys more support than TTP. Reason is that PTM has raised political issues, to which Mohsen Daur was part of it for some time. So their political support is more. They can gather the people. They are the public face. TTP are hiding. TTP does not have governing spaces. Yes, they may come and enter there, and recently, now people are actually rising against the TTP, and they have in fact killed those people also. So this is the situation. On the political chessboard, this can change as far as Pakistan. And then Pakistan has got institutions. Forget about, we talk about army and others. It is actually the institutions, whether it's civil or military institutions, they are working. In Afghanistan, it is not. Had this been the case, despite 20 years of so-called democratic rule, with more than 300,000 army, it melted down. It melted down without fighting with the Taliban. So there were no institutions. So institutional building in Afghanistan has been lacking ever since the Soviet troops left Afghanistan. And they have destroyed. And the problem with Afghanistan is that its leaders destroyed the country. Now they are sitting outside the country having a lavish life. And the people are left there to live day-to-day basis, and everything is destroyed. And its fallout would be borne by the immediate neighbors. Now, Afghanistan is a center of war economy. to which our two provinces, Balochistan and KP, are equally impacted. And this is the problem we are immediately facing, and there's a need to address those issues. Of course, governments have inefficiencies. That is true for Pakistan also, but the institutions are working. And yes, good or bad, but I think they will be ultimately, it would be the institutions which will ultimately succeed. This is not the case as far as Afghanistan is concerned. I fully agree with Dr. Hans Chandler that there's no good news. But at the moment, yes, there's no good news. But at the same time, I think Taliban have failed to deliver. And that is the cause for not only concern, but also optimism. Optimism, but I don't see much optimism because the opposition is not united enough. It is not organized enough. It is not coherent. So these are the challenges. With all these challenges, you have to deal with Afghanistan, whether as a country, as Pakistan, or as Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Iran, or within Afghanistan, whether it is opposition sitting outside mostly, or for that matter, even if inside the country, they are not actually facing the challenges and they are not so much open to challenge the Taliban. So here I would stop here with this not so optimistic note, but at the same time, there is no cause for to be too pessimistic because we are talking about politics, and politics changes with the change in scene and the change in characters. So I think ultimately you will have better results because it's an ongoing process. So it never stagnates. I stop here. I'll welcome the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Very much appreciate your input. Our final panelist this afternoon or morning, or late at night, no matter where you are, is Kabir Taneja, a leading researcher, as I mentioned earlier, on foreign policy, security and extremist movements across South and West Asia. He's at the Observer Research Foundation, which is a major Indian think tank focused on strategic studies and international security and foreign policy. And Kabir's own work has examined everything from the evolution of jihadist ecosystems to regional geopolitics, technological influence on militancy, and India's strategic posture towards Afghanistan and its neighbourhood. Kabir has been an important voice in explaining how transnational threats intersect with state policy, with regional competition, and with local dynamics. Kabir, you've said that looking at everything through the India-Pakistan lens is myopic, and have termed the ongoing tensions between the Taliban and Pakistan as a family feud and a crisis coming from Pakistan's domestic choices. Anything else you've said is a measure of distraction. So given the way that regional and global security landscapes are shifting and how Afghanistan continues to sit at the centre of many of these currents, how do you see the major regional actors recalibrating their strategies towards Afghanistan? And what does that mean for stability, engagement, and the wider security picture?
Thank you so much, Lynn, and thanks to the organizers, BID, of course, for the invitation. It has been really great listening to all the other panelists, and I thank them for their interventions. If anyone was expecting the last speaker is going to add any optimism, I hate to disappoint. I will be continuing the trajectory of the slightly pessimistic take, although Ambassador Durrani did try to add a semblance of positivity. But there are 2 points or two sort of ways that I would like to take my intervention in. The first is, of course, a very quick run through on India's outreach to the Taliban. Considering interim Foreign Minister Muttaqi was there recently, and the Taliban Industries Minister is in India right now till Monday, I think. When I think if you see sort of India's outlook towards the Taliban, it has been on two sort of core fronts. Initially, or since 2021 to 2020, about 2023, I think it was pretty much embroiled in confusion from a domestic politics point of view, from a regional politics point of view, and from an international diplomacy point of view. But also the concern was bound to meet pragmatism at some point. And that is largely because it's a symptom of geography. Afghanistan is a neighbor, and what has happened there impacts us directly or indirectly, both from a security point of view, from an economic point of view, and from, of course, a sort of regional construct point of view. Uh, I think India was one of the last countries in the region to really, really start engaging the Taliban in a very overt manner. Not be going beyond the technical offices and whatever a technical office is. No one has really answered me ever what a technical office is. But starting to engage with the Taliban because it's a reality, as one of the speakers said earlier, it's something that you can't ignore. And I think one of the things that doesn't get talked about these days when it comes to outreach to Taliban, I agree that there needs to be more discussion about just the impact that a US Taliban deal had at that point of time. I think it really, really left a lot of countries in the region in a lurch, considering there was very minimal um, uh, talk between a lot of the regional actors and the US specifically when it came to that kind of deal being signed and what impact it is going to have. And after, of course, it was signed, from even the Indian foreign minister at some point said, well, we were not expecting the US to be there forever. But I think the way that the exit took place, the chaos that happened, the images of people hanging on C-17 jets as they were taking off from Kabul, uh, impacted from, or at least change Indian perception that I think a lot more leverage needs to be built up in the region by itself instead of expecting a country like the US, which has been embroiled in Afghanistan for 2 decades, to do something about it. Now we have understood the US has left. As I think Dr. Schindler was alluding to earlier, even raising Afghanistan as an issue today, there's almost sort of you can see people leaving the room very, very quickly because they don't want to engage. I think more than engagement, they don't want to accept that it was such a monumental failure on the Western power part. And it's not just Afghanistan. I think if you start counting, we can of course talk about Africa and sort of other countries where space has been ceded. But from an Indian point of view, I think there were 70 countries that really, really started dialogue of some sort with the Taliban before India really, really got involved and started doing it in a much more official manner rather than background manner. And of course, as I said, we even if you see our engagement with the Taliban when Muttaqi came here, he was here for almost a week. The statement that came out from the official statement that came out, of course, it reiterated one of India's core concerns is that security is an absolute critical issue. And that has been sort of the Taliban line that we will never allow our land to be used against any other country. I don't think that's holding up very well for a lot of the neighborhood. But beyond that, if you see from an Indian perspective, the largely all statements, including the ones that have been released over the past 24 hours with the industries minister here, has been largely economic and have largely been about engaging the Taliban, the Afghan population. And we go back to basically the 90s, right? Even then, India had some sort of engagement with the Taliban, not as overt as we are seeing today, but almost everyone is doing that at this point of time. But having that engagement with the Afghan people has been a very critical part of India's outreach, sort of reaching out to absolutely the base level, whether it's through educational scholarship, whether it's through medical help, and so on and so forth. Building that capacity with the Afghan population has been critical, and not losing that is also equally critical. So that because if we go back to 2021, India also sort of shut down visas for Afghans because they were not sure who's going to show up at the doors. and rebuilding that capacity was absolutely important from an Indian point of view. So India was never going to be out beyond a point. India was always going to have that sort of rekindle that outreach once it assessed what exactly is going to take place as far as the Taliban is concerned, and what kind of political constitution that it will try to develop. Again, going back, I don't think it has developed really any kind of political blueprint or constitution, let alone an economic one. It's sort of a grab of positions in power at this point of time. We often sort of see friction coming up between what Kandahar is saying or what Kabul is saying. During a lot of, for example, skirmishes that happened between the Taliban and Pakistan, we really didn't hear from Sirajuddin Haqqani all that much, at least on public platforms, which was very interesting dynamic for me personally to follow. But yes, it did. India was already, in a mobile situation on how to deal with the Taliban. But India's critical problem about dealing with the Taliban is how do you market it domestically? How do you market it in a country that has suffered from terrorism for such a long period of time that you are now suddenly engaging with the Taliban? And so that was a primary reason why we saw such a long wait between 2021 and 2025 before that kind of engagement really fructified. So just broadly, very quickly, that is, I think, some of the Indian thinking. And let me just segue from that a little bit to one critical point that I think gets missed out on a lot of times when we're talking Afghanistan. There is no regional consensus on the Taliban. There is no overlap of a common security threat. There is no overlap of ideation of how to deal with the Taliban. Earlier, of course, when certain countries were supporting the Northern Alliance, there was a group that had some sort of design on what to do and what not to do at that point. But right now, everyone from Central Asia to Iran to India to Pakistan, they all have very individualistic viewpoints on how to deal with the Taliban. And I think that gives the Taliban an opportunity to play the region according to what the whims and fancies that they would like to play to. Sort of picking out all these discrepancies in geopolitics and all these discrepancies in security requirements, and try to act on it from their own interest perspective and what they require from a lot of these countries. So the fact that earlier everyone was very uh, comfortable, for lack of a better term, when the US and NATO security umbrella was there, because they didn't have to fight. They could do everything else that was required, whether that's any kind of diplomacy that they were interested in. But their security was sort of taken care of. It was guaranteed in a certain way. But now, of course, with that cover gone, everyone has to sort of reach out to the Taliban according to their own views, and what they want out of the Taliban. And no regional country, as far as I see it, has these sort of that Venn diagram of security even doesn't come together. There are no common fields in the center for most of the regional countries, even when it comes to terrorism, unfortunately, or even when it comes to extremism. So I think unfortunately, going forward, South Asia specifically will see a rise in hostilities, for lack of better term, again, when it comes to these kind of groups being a bit more activated, a bit more emboldened, because there are more political vacuums, because there are more security vacuums going forward. For example, we've seen proliferation of US and NATO-made weapons into Kashmir in hands of terrorist organizations. So there are these sort of real security ideas and requirements that have been placed in front of the Taliban. And of course, the Taliban says that yes, we are going to handle this, or we are going to handle that, and really nothing really. There's no way to get a guarantee from them that has this been handled or has this not been handled, and so on and so forth. We are not talking in Kabul to a rational actor. Just because they're in a position of power right now does not make them into a rational entity. Does not make them into an entity that has experience in A, governance, of course, but also B, in providing security, considering they were fighting security most of their lives. Now, suddenly, when you have to provide security, it's a whole different ballgame that may require you to imprison your fellow fighters at some level. If the requirement, if the push comes from country A or country B, whether they're Al Qaeda, there's a lot of Al Qaeda is very active in Afghanistan, for example. But of course, the Taliban will never give up. If the Taliban was open to taking bombs for 20 years and not give up Osama bin Laden, this is not really the time where the Taliban is giving up anything when it comes to security guarantees. So I think, adding to the pessimism train, I think unfortunately over the next 3, 4, or 5 years, with some of the murmurs that you hear from Afghanistan every now and then within the Taliban specifically, we are going to see a time of upheaval coming out of Afghanistan, because I don't think the Taliban will be able to um, hold the sort of hold those post 2021 quote unquote peace that they have been marketing around the world, and that is a real threat for across the region. From ranging from Central Asia, India, Pakistan, Iran, everyone, and the only way to sort of try and discuss that before that eventuality takes place is for a regional forum to be there where all these countries can sit around and have that discussion. But unfortunately, as I mentioned before, geopolitics has different ideals and ideas at this point of time. Iran has different requirements out of the Taliban to make sure the US never returns, the West never returns in this part of the world. Central Asia decided, you know what, we'll just talk economics with them. We are not to make sure that the borders are secure. Pakistan has the Durand Line issue and multiple issues now that have come out from the Taliban fold. So yeah, in the next, I think, half a decade, we are going to see an upheaval coming out of Afghanistan. And as just final point, as Dr. Schindler said, I think it was Dr. Schindler, he said that until something happens eventually somewhere at scale, and the eyes will come back. The problem hasn't gone away, but other countries that were dealing with the problem are fatigued, and they don't have the capacities and political will at this point of time, from the public perception to the government perception, to look at Afghanistan once again. So right now, it's up to the region to see what kind of security and political threats are coming. All the regional countries will handle it individually. They will not handle it as a collective. That gives the Taliban ample space to basically thrive and do what they want to do. I'll just stop there. I'm happy to take questions.
Well, thank you very much for your comments, Kabir. Given what you mentioned as New Delhi's security concerns and its limited but ongoing diplomatic engagement, do you think that India's desire to have some sort of diplomatic softening with the Taliban has come too late for New Delhi to be able to have any meaningful influence on what you've described as an erratic and irrational, and we've heard it from other participants as well, player?
No, Lynn, look, India's concern, look, I don't think there is anyone is under any illusion that the Taliban is going to deliver big on anything. That includes security guarantees or any kind of security guarantees that they talk about. I don't think beyond a point they have full control where they can say, yes, entity A, B, and C is not going to target India. I don't think they are in that position to follow up on that. But also, like I said, from an Indian point of view, it's equally challenging on how do the people here perceive the Taliban, or sort of the normalization with the Taliban. When Interim Minister Mutaki was here, there was a huge hue and cry when he did a press conference here and did not allow women journalists to go in. And that that entire fracas, which then they tried to backtrack on in a very flimsy way, became the headline for the day. And that pressure does not go to the Taliban. The Taliban doesn't care on that front. That pressure comes back home to domestic politics. But from an Indian point of view, I think it was hosting the Taliban here, because it's not just about the press conference that was allowed. Interim Minister Mutaki also went to Deoband seminary, where he was sort of by this
Mobbed.
huge crowd. Exactly.
Yep.
But having very quickly said that, Deoband Seminary has also been that place where the leaders of that seminary have actually said in the past, especially after 2021, that yes, they don't really condone the Americans leaving in any shape or form, but they want the Taliban to be inclusive. They want the Taliban to allow schools to open. So that kind of messaging from the Deoband Seminary is important. It's a very important point that the Indians tried to mobilize during his visit as well. So he was sent there. Yes, you saw the mob, but I would be very, very surprised if all the messages that were delivered to him inside rooms were not completely ingratiating the Taliban's quote unquote victory in 2021. But I think there was a lot of realistic messaging saying that, if you don't do X, Y, Z, A, B, and C over the coming time, your power hold is not going to be a long-term one.
Good. Well, thank you for your comments. I've got a couple of questions from audience participants. Here's one for Dr. Schindler, which is quite interesting. The world sees that most terrorist organizations are targeting to recruit minors for multiple reasons, one of them being that maybe minors cannot be held for long if arrested. The legal system in Europe and Western countries are based on this principle. So what do you recommend for the Western countries, Hans? How can they fight this? It requires a joint collaboration, perhaps between the Five Eyes members. That's a question for you, Hans, from an anonymous attendee.
Look, I don't think it's a deliberate strategy that is thought through. What is clearly the case is that we do see ever younger perpetrators. I talked about that Taylor Swift attempt to bomb the Taylor Swift concert in Vienna, and the perpetrators are between 17 and 19 years old. And they had a very viable attack plan, including having already infiltrated the security as well as the logistical companies that were setting up the concert. So it would have worked if it hadn't come out. The situation is not that these groups are catering more to young people. The situation is that we see a more modern form of terrorism. There is a clear cost-benefit analysis that has been done that in order to try something akin to what happened in Moscow in spring 2024, you're taking enormous risk and enormous resources. These fighters could have been intercepted while they were in the safe houses in Turkey. They could have been intercepted when they entered Moscow. They could have been intercepted before they entered the theater. And then you had 3 years of preparation and training for these fighters, basically in vain. That's a high investment, high yield from a terrorism perspective proposition. Now, most terror groups, including IS, is moving away a little bit from that pattern and is looking to radicalize individuals and then provide actual individuals with some sort of online support on how to do this, give them instructions. So very paradigmatically demonstrated both in the Solingen attack, which interestingly implemented all of the advice what IS has put online in the last 7 years on how to do a knife attack, and the New Orleans attack, which up to the way that the car was designed, where the flag was placed at the back of the truck, implemented exactly how IS advises to do a vehicular attack. So it works very well. The reason why the perpetrators are getting younger is because this works very well on TikTok. And TikTok is a platform that is very much catering to a much, much younger audience, but at the same time has the most aggressive algorithm in the entire social media industry and the least control on content monitoring. So you have now a situation where the advice is there. You do have multiple reasons why some people radicalize, whether it's Afghanistan or whether it's Africa, whether it's the victory narrative, whether it's Gaza. And I note that even the Islamic State is talking about Gaza incessantly in the last 2 years, despite the fact that ideologically IS could not accept a Palestinian state. Either you got a caliphate or you don't got a caliphate, and no Palestinian government could exist. They have to be loyal to the caliph without having a Palestinian government, but they see this as an opportunity. So you have a radicalization drive through these conflicts. You have a much more aggressive social media environment, and you have the advice coming, and all of this is hitting youth. So the way to fight this is simply to make sure that we take the social media companies for once to task. It's their content that they're earning money with. And so they have a responsibility to cooperate not reactively but proactively with the security service by giving a warning that out of the 10,000 people having weird and extremist and dangerous ideas online, these are the 5 that we have a high suspicion that they are radicalizing towards violence. If Facebook was in the late 1990s able to promise women that they can tell them that they're pregnant without a pregnancy test with 99% accuracy, they surely can figure out who is radicalizing towards violence and who is not.
Indeed. Thanks, Hans. We've got time for one more question, which I'd like to direct to Nilüfer. Nilüfer, you've talked in the past about the Taliban shadow. For those countries that are moving towards greater engagement, especially those in the neighbourhood, why is it that you think that they have no choice when after more than 4 years, we've seen that the Taliban just do whatever they want to do? They don't bow to pressure. Is there any way that you can explain why countries engaging with a group that we've heard is irrational and immovable and doubles down on bad behaviour, if you like? And what do you think can be done to pressure the Taliban to alleviate the suffering of the Afghan people and maybe move towards a more normal governance situation? Is that even possible?
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Let me first come to the last question of yours and then go back to the regional countries. Well, I highlighted on the regional instability caused by the Taliban presence and also the fact that inside Afghanistan, also the madrasization that we are concerned about, that's going to cause a long-term instability in Afghanistan, the region. I did not talk about, and I think it was also not so much discussed in our panel today, about the governance, the whole governance mood, kind of governance that Taliban launched since they have taken over. So in addition to them as a militant group, or what Dr. Hans said as a terror group, they are also a totalitarian system. They put a totalitarian system in place. So look, they are all kinds of suppression that they launched in that society through their governance strategies, through edicts and directives that enforce actually the characteristics of totalitarian system in that country, which itself is a threat to the both soft and hard security going forward. That human security is one of them, of course, we have seen. And then also in a long term, that could cause a hard security threat that many of our esteemed panelists talk about that. Now, I think that is kind of an instability that I would see. Then their nature as a terror or militant group, their nature as a totalitarian system, they all make them an existential threat to the country's future and to the region. Now, why the countries in the region are actually not aligning with them, but trying to partner or at least cooperate with them in many, many instances. As I think it was Kabir mentioned, also Ambassador Durrani mentioned about that. Well, the countries in proximity, they always need each other, right? They don't have a choice, in a sense that there's trade and transit going on, in a sense to contend the security threat, in a sense that there's a people's movement from country to country, and they have to take a measure in order to do the day-to-day management, So this day-to-day management requires this country, particularly the neighboring states around Afghanistan, to have some sort of cooperation, like Uzbekistan start, right? Uzbekistan start with the notion of economic reintegration. That was a foreign policy of the Uzbekistan towards the region, that let's promote peace and security through regional integration, right? And that they started actually supporting Taliban from day one, facilitating humanitarian aid, facilitating development program, causing a lot with the Taliban, because for them, I mean, the narrative is let's promote peace and let's contend the security threat from Afghanistan through economic reintegration. The same applies to Iran. Iran hosted Mullah Baradar during even before the Doha agreement was signed, with the perception that they would be next power. So we have to deal with the water, we have to deal with the border, we have to deal with the people's movement. So let's connect with them, right? And the most important thing, to contend the security threats, that is the interest of all these regional countries. And going forward to Tajikistan, which Tajikistan actually recently, they're trying to also accept the fact that okay, now we have to really cooperate with the regime in order to sustain, in order to contain the security threats. So I think it's a very opportunistic short-term vision or short-term agenda that these countries in the region have in order to manage day-to-day activities. As Kabir has, I think, articulately mentioned, and that's my perception also, that there is no general regional consensus toward the Taliban. And there is no long-term strategy towards the Taliban. Why? Because these countries also know that the Taliban are not causing any stability in Afghanistan. There's no inclusive governance or government. There is suppression of human rights, particularly women's rights, which 50% of population are not deprived from their basic rights. And there is also no assurances from the Taliban that they have cut ties with the other terror groups. So they all are signals of security threats that these countries know. So the only option they think at this point, in order to cement their short-term policy, is engagement. Right? Let's engage with them. That India recently started. Let's engage with them in order to contend security threats. Now, you said what has to be done? There are alternative strategies. I think Ambassador mentioned that, and I quite agree with him, there is no appetite at all, right, to intervene in Afghanistan cause anymore. Here in Washington, we see, no, nobody wants to even raise that. Afghanistan is no more in the news. Afghanistan is no more the talks. No one really have the appetite to intervene in a crisis. It seems there's kind of a tiredness too, until there's something big happens and then people turn their eyes towards the country. Other than that, there is no appetite at all. But there are some soft strategies that sometimes we try to count on the UN, but it's not really a good strategy to count on the UN at this point. There should be a regional mechanism, the idea of regional mechanism to be launched in the region. And the regional mechanism, there has been a lot of talks, by the way, from last 4 years, who to take the lead on that regional mechanism, how to be facilitated. But then there are players like Russia, Iran, and China in the region, that they don't like any other intervention to create a regional mechanism. For example, SCO is there, Moscow platform is there, and Iran has its own kind of regional. So this country has already created their regional mechanism, and they think that we are going to solve it and solve the issues. But I think their formats, including the SCO, including the Moscow format, they haven't produced any concrete outcome so far. So for me, I have written extensively on this platform from last 4 years, whenever they were convened, and I have all those analysis why they haven't proved to be successful, and why there is a need for a regional mechanism to be in place in order to create a regional consensus. Because this country-based opportunistic approach, Taliban will benefit from this, as Kabir mentioned. Taliban will really benefit from this one-on-one country relationship that they have, and they are using, by the way, they are using their connection with the terror groups or militant groups. They are using their ties with them as a leverage in negotiations. Yeah. So, as Ambassador mentioned, and I think it was also Dr. Hans mentioned about the positioning thing. I mean, in any negotiation, they talk from position of power, rather than interest-based negotiation. So as a conflict resolution student, when you talk from, when any group and a party in a negotiation table, when they talk from position of power, not the interest, then that negotiation doesn't end to any successful outcome. And we have seen in Taliban Doha negotiation, we have seen recently and Qatar and Turkey with Pakistan, and we're going to see, and we have seen also in the Doha process, all were failures because they always use their the tactics that they have been using from past and their ties as a leverage in all these negotiations that happen. So in a nutshell, joining the rest of the cohort here, I'm also extremely pessimist about the future of the security and stability both in Afghanistan and the region. Why? For two reasons. First, originally the nature of this group, the Taliban regime, that is problematic, that is challenging, that is dangerous. And both internally for the stability and security of Afghanistan, and that will expand beyond the border, and as Dr. Hans mentioned, and globally as well. So I think keeping all this point, we wouldn't see any change until there would be a change in an entire system, which would be a creation of a regional mechanism, and also internally in Afghanistan, a political process that many also right now they are talking about it, a political process that shapes and reshape the future government in Afghanistan. So I think there should be an internal process, and there should be a regional process, and there should be a kind of a simultaneous move for these two processes to go in order to find out a solution for the problems that we are talking. I stop there. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think we'll squeeze in one more audience question for Ambassador Durrani, if you don't mind. One of our listeners would like to know if you believe, given the deterioration of the relationship between Pakistan and the Taliban and the breakdown of security across the border, the deployment of the TTP, whether or not, the question is, it might be time for Pakistan to admit that its strategy of supporting the Taliban for decades was a mistake?
Well, I think borrowing from Kabir's statement that it was pragmatism. So the pragmatic approach was that when we talk about Taliban, it's a particular situation as far as Pakistan, Afghanistan is concerned, which is not common with other 5 neighbors of Afghanistan. And that is, we have divided tribes, 17 tribes on both sides of the border. So therefore, that in fact forced decision makers in Pakistan to adopt a policy. It was not support, but it was give and take. So that's why in that, I think mistakes were committed, which is why the TTP came into being. This TTP was actually a reaction because when General Musharraf, as the critics say, took the U-turn after the 9/11, so these TTP guys told Musharraf that we are the same Mujahideen. It is you who have taken the U-turn. So therefore, they were fighting against the government, against its policy. But you know that in a state, non-state actors cannot be allowed to dictate the agenda by force. And this is what the state of Pakistan was doing. And this is what we have done it. And that's why I said that they are on the run. They are not ruling any part of the district, what to talk of, or even a tehsil, which is a lower level. So, and they are holed up. But with Afghanistan, the problem is they roam around freely. And their leadership is holed up in Afghanistan. And that is the problem. Otherwise, had they been here within Pakistani borders, so they could have been taken care of. But they are not. And it will take a while. But mistakes, yes, mistakes have been committed. There is no, denying the fact, and which is why I think some corrective measures have been taken, and hopefully more corrective measures will be taken. Yes.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to close there. We've run way over time. I think with the brains trust that we've pulled together today, we could go on for hours, but maybe we'd better not. So I'll just recap, really we've covered a huge amount of ground, from the realities facing Afghan and Pakistani people on the ground to the regional security ripple effects, to the difficult policy choices, the lack of regional cohesion, and the willing denial of the broader powers to the reality of the region. And what's clear is that none of these issues that we've touched on today exist in isolation. Security, rights, diplomacy, regional politics are all tightly intertwined, and the decisions, if any decisions were being made now, they would be shaping the region for a long time to come. But maybe the lack of decision is also going to serve that purpose as well. So suffice it to say, Ambassador Durrani, Dr. Hans, Schindler, Kabir Taneja, Dr. Nilüfer Saki, and I think Mohsin has already left us for another engagement. But let me say thank you again for your insights and for your time. And we'll be posting a recording of our conversation online for a wider audience. To your wisdom. Thank you again, and goodbye.